The year was 1989, and Cedar Point was ready to shatter some records with the debut of the world's first full-circuit roller coaster that stands at a height of 200 or more feet. Ever since Magnum XL 200 opened, we have seen dozens upon dozens of roller coasters break the 200-foot barrier. Dubbed a hypercoaster, these rides feature massive drops, impressive airtime, some even offer inversions, and all of them are Skyline game changers. While it seems like most larger parks already offer hypercoasters, here are 10 parks that I think would benefit from a ride of this size. But the best part is, I will even show you where each park on the list could fit a hyper, and to make it even more challenging, I will not be removing any coaster to fit in my layout within the park. Starting off with our first park. Busch Gardens, Tampa. Why it makes sense. If the park cannot go giga, then a hyper is the next best fit for the park. This thing would instantly become the most popular coaster in the park with the GP. Yes, over Gwazi. Because the general public love their hypercoasters. Where it could be located. The brown box represents the coaster station, while the pink section is the lift hill. The bright green is from the top of the lift hill to the final brake run, and the blue is the brake run. The station would be located just behind Tigris, and the layout would cover the old Python Jungala plot of land. And since it's a hyper, it would also travel behind Congo Rapids and Kumba. And just like Dollywood, I could see this coaster coming from any manufacturer, but I would personally love to see a Mack Rides hyper for BGT. In my opinion, the park already has enough B&Ms. Next up is Italy's Mirabalandia. Why it makes sense. The park's tallest coaster is Ice Speed at 180 feet. So by adding a hypercoaster that would feature over 5,000 feet of track and a bunch of airtime hills would really benefit this park that offers mostly shorter coasters in length and no real floating airtime. Where it could be located. The station could be located behind the park's new for 2019 Desmo Race Coaster, and as you see, the layout would travel over the ponds near the back of the park. This area is massive, so Mirabalandia could do pretty much whatever they wanted to with this coaster's layout. As for manufacturer, the park already offers a few Intamins and a B&M, so I think either of those would make the most sense for the park. Now this list of parks is by all means not a prediction, but more just me sharing with you parks that I think would benefit from a hypercoaster. Again, not predictions. Six Flags Fiesta Texas. Why it makes sense. It's clear that Six Flags really loves Fiesta, and why wouldn't they? The park offers a great setting, the attendance is always strong, and it's one of the best overall parks in the entire chain. It's clear that Fiesta could benefit from another high capacity coaster, and to cut down on some of the cost of a traditional hyper, the park could have the layout play off the rock quarry wall in some way, really making this potential coaster one of the most unique ones in the world. Now with the huge price tag hypers come with, not every park could afford one, and another thing that might stop some of these parks is if there is a height restriction for that particular park. And let's be honest here, will Six Flags spend this type of money at the moment on a hyper? I think we all know the answer to that question. But who knows what would happen if, let's say, Cedar Fair would finally purchase the park. Where could the hyper be located? Definitely the boardwalk area. And my reasoning is this. This area could definitely use some TLC, and the anchor attraction is currently the Gerstlauer family spinning coaster Pandemonium. So here is how I envision a layout for a hyper fitting into Fiesta. Since B&M, Mack Rides, and Intamin would be out of the Six Flags budget at the moment, I personally think if this would ever come true, that we would see this coming from Vekoma. The layout would feature a curved first drop that hugs the top of the rock quarry wall before diving off of it to plummet to the bottom of the first drop. This coaster would be easy to build it in this location, since all the park would have to do is remove some trees and some possible scorpions. We are heading to Doswell, Virginia for King's Dominion, and why it makes sense. You're going to give the GP a coaster that they're going to flock to and adore, because sadly I-305 isn't it. Now for us, it is, but not the standard GP. Also, adding a hypercoaster that features floating airtime, massive hills, and a more tame riding experience would really flush a ton of more people through the front gate each day, where King's Dominion could fit a hyper. We are heading to the Old Virginia area of the park because it's time to say goodbye to the park's go-kart track to Grand Prix Raceway. This hypercoaster would come from B&M and offer a very unique layout that would wrap around grizzly and twisted timbers. But most importantly, this placement would bring a much needed large coaster to this side of the park. I would envision something around the same size as Kings Island's Diamondback for this coaster. Now, if you are enjoying this video, then all I ask that you do is give it a like. That is the best way you can help the channel. Also, if you're looking for some cool coaster merch to wear at the parks, then you have to check out my merch store, and you can find the link to it in the description of this video. And now it's time to head to one of the most up-and-coming parks over in Europe, Tovarland. Why it makes sense. You are looking at one of the fastest growing parks in Europe, and rightfully so. Tovarland is amazing. This park focuses on everything we love: theming, quality rides, attention to detail, and of course, world-class coasters. So why not add a new coaster that would dominate the skyline and place Tovarland on the map and be talked about as having a top 5 coaster collection in Europe? Where it could be located. There is a ton of unused area to the left of the current park, and while I do not know if the park owns this land or not, it's fun to dream with this project and think what if. If Tovarland went hyper, I could see this coming from Intamin or Vekoma. I think either one would create a coaster that could become one of the best in the world. Heading back to America for Silver Dollar City. Why it makes sense. Just like other parks on this top 10, Silver Dollar City could really benefit from a high-capacity hypercoaster that really uses the terrain to its advantage. Where it could be located. As we know, Silver Dollar City is set to open a brand new Fire in the Hole attraction in 2024, and that means that the current attraction will probably get bulldozed. So I would suspect that all eyes will be on this location for the park's next major coaster. And as for this hyper, I think Mack Rides make a ton of sense. Plus, we know that Herschend and Mack Rides love working together after Time Traveler. The ride's layout could feature an inversion or two, some wild crazy transitions, ejector and floating airtime, but what I'm most intrigued about Silver Dollar City and a potential hypercoaster is how they can get the layout to play off with the terrain the park sits on. Not only would this be a cost savings measure, but this could also really give Silver Dollar City a chance at building one of the best coasters ever created. This layout I created, as you can see, would head over Outlaw Run and feature a very unique layout for a hyper. Six Flags St. Louis. Now again, we know that Six Flags cannot afford a hypercoaster at the moment, but there's no denying that the park could benefit from a hyper. Why it makes sense. If Six Flags really wants to improve their St. Louis property, then they need to do something, and something fast. RMC Boss? I mean, it's been a rumor for what now, 10 years? So a hypercoaster would give the park a very smooth coaster that the GP would eat up. But too bad, this will probably never happen, unfortunately. Where it could be located. If you've ever been to Six Flags St. Louis before, then you know that the park kind of sits along a hill, with the back part of the park being the highest in elevation. So a roller coaster that would use the terrain to its advantage will be something that I think is very possible, as you can see by my layout here. I could also see this hyper coming from Vekoma and offering a twisted first drop. Knott's Berry Farm. Why it makes sense. Capacity, capacity, and capacity. Knott's Berry Farm, one of the most visited parks in the world outside of Disney and Universal, only offers one high-capacity coaster in Silver Bullet. So it's clear that Knott's desperately needs a capacity monster, and a new hyper could be just that. But who knows, maybe the park still wants a Giga. But where could it be located? As you can see, this hyper would feature a very unique layout due to the existing attractions, roads, and other Knott staples in the way. So having the hyper travel in this location might keep the nearby neighbors happier and change the landscape of the park forever. You will not lose any parking spots for this B&M Hyper, nor you will not ruin the feel of the park by adding this major coaster. If not, without a Hyper, then we could be looking at the most popular coaster along the entire West Coast. We are heading to the Smoky Mountains for Dollywood, and why it makes sense is pretty simple. Did you know that Dollywood does not offer a roller coaster that features 4,000 feet of track or longer? Now let that sink in for a minute. Not even their new for 2023 Big Bear Mountain features over 4,000 feet. So by adding a coaster over 5,000 feet would make a ton of sense due to capacity and a ride that offers the longest ride time in the park. Where it could be located. The Old Mountain Sidewinder plot of land has me really curious and intrigued. This whole area is elevated and Dollywood could do some very special things with this location. If Dollywood would get a Hyper, then I think we could see it coming from any of the 4 major companies, B&M, Vekoma, Intamin, or Mack Rides. Either way, a Hyper that is located in the center of the park makes a ton of sense, and I do think has a real shot at becoming Dollywood's major 2026 project. Heading to Santa Claus, Indiana for the next park, and of course, that is Holiday World, and why it makes sense. This park loves its airtime and caters to the enthusiast more so than probably any other park out there. But would that alone be the reason why Holiday World spends nearly $20 million on their next coaster? I highly doubt it, but it's definitely fun to think about. Where it could be located. The station would be located where the park's old Pilgrim's Plunge water attraction was once located and feature a twisted first drop, tons of airtime moments, and to help cut down on the cost, I think we'll be looking at a Hyper that would feature more low to the ground elements. As for the manufacturer, maybe Mack Rides? Or what if Intamin throws the park a nice discount after their mess up with their now defunct water ride? Would Holiday World consider? Most likely not, but crazier things have happened. Are there any parks out there that I did not mention that you think could benefit from a Hyper? If so, which parks? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to smile today, think positive, and keep riding coasters.